The jungle split open beneath Kong's feet, and something down there screamed his name without words. Kong froze on the black stone ridge above Skull Island's fractured interior, one massive hand pressed into the ground. He had heard roars before. Threats, warnings, territorial calls from beasts that still survived in the island's poisoned corners. But this sound was different. It did not rise through the air. It came through the rock. Deep below him, beneath root and lava vein and buried temple stone, a cry pulsed upward like a heartbeat trapped under a coffin lid. It was old, hurt, desperate, and for the first time in years, Kong did not look like a king surveying his domain. He looked like something ancient had just called to the last creature strong enough to answer. Across a shattered basin nearly a quarter-mile away, Elias Reed dropped to one knee as the earth shivered under him. The six-man survey team had spent 2 days mapping fresh sink lines that had split open across the southern spine of Skull Island. Claire Whitmore had called them fault scars. Elias knew better. Faults did not leave claw-shaped gouges burned into stone. Claire crouched beside a jagged break in the ground, gloved fingers tracing a line of smooth black mineral exposed by the tremor. It reflected light like polished glass, except it was warm. Too warm. A second vibration ran through the basin, stronger than the first, and tiny pebbles began to dance toward the crack. Back up, Elias snapped. The order came a second too late. The split in the earth burst outward with a violent blast of dirt and shattered rock. One of the crew was thrown flat. Another screamed as a spined crawler exploded from the trench, all hooked legs and pale armored skin, blind eyes sealed under a skull plated like hammered bone. It was followed by 3 more, then 6, then a swarm spilling from underground like the island had started bleeding monsters. These were not hunters rushing in from the jungle. They were being forced up from below. Elias moved first, not away from the creatures, but toward Claire. She had fallen hard against the edge of the crack, one boot sliding into the widening gap as the ground broke under her. Elias lunged, caught the back of her harness, and yanked her sideways just as a crawler's hooked forelimb stabbed into the spot where her chest had been. He hit the dirt with Claire under him, rolled once, drew his flare knife, and slashed bright chemical fire straight across the creature's face. The crawler recoiled with a shriek. "Move!" Elias shouted. Claire did not argue. She grabbed the seismic case she had almost lost, then scrambled for higher stone while Elias drove himself between her and the swarm. Behind them, the survey team opened fire with signal charges and percussion rounds, but the basin was already collapsing into panic. Another crawler dragged a crewman screaming toward the trench. A third leaped onto a boulder and snapped its jaws at empty air. Then everything stopped, not because the creatures retreated, because Kong landed in the middle of them. The impact hit like a bomb. Stone burst outward. 2 crawlers were crushed instantly beneath his fists. Another was hurled through a dead tree hard enough to snap the trunk in half. Kong roared, not in rage alone, but in command. It was the kind of roar that made the island remember who ruled it. The surviving crawlers scattered in every direction. But Kong did not chase them. He turned from the fleeing predators and looked straight at the trench they had come from. Claire saw it too. Set into the exposed wall beneath the broken earth was a ring of carved stone, huge and perfectly circular, descending into darkness. It was not natural bedrock. It was architecture, ancient, symmetrical, and marked with the same black glassy mineral she had touched moments earlier. Around its rim were massive handprints fossilized into the stone. Not human, not recent. Kong stepped closer, and his breathing changed. Slower, heavier. Recognition. The cry came again. The second cry did not rise through the hole like sound. It came through the stone itself, a deep, shuddering moan that rolled up the carved ring and into the bones of everyone standing near it. Dust spilled from the broken ledge. Loose pebbles skipped inward. Far below, something answered with a slow, impossible thud. Not footsteps. A heartbeat. Claire Whitmore dropped to one knee beside the rim and pressed her palm against the black glass veining the ancient stone. It was warm now, warmer than the surrounding rock. The mineral was pulsing in faint intervals, like blood moving through buried veins. "This place isn't dead," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's waking up." Behind her, the survey team backed away from the edge. One man muttered that they needed to leave. Another was already reaching for the radio clipped to his pack. calling for a retrieval point that no longer existed now that the valley floor had split open beneath them. Elias Reed did not look at the radio. His eyes were on Kong. The giant ape stood over the circular descent with his shoulders drawn high and rigid, head angled toward the dark below. He was not preparing to attack. He was listening. The cry came again, longer this time, carrying a strange note inside it. Pain. Yes, but also warning. Then Kong did something none of them expected. He slammed both fists into the stone rim. The entire ring boomed like a struck bell. Chunks of dirt tore free from the walls. The valley shook so hard the survey team fell to the ground. For one terrible second, Elias thought Kong had triggered a collapse. But Claire saw it first. The carved handprints around the ring began to glow from within, each one filling with a dim amber light that traveled down into the shaft in a widening spiral. It's a lock, Claire said. Her fear had changed shape now. It was no longer fear of what might be down there. It was fear of what had just been opened. A crack split across the valley floor 50 yards away. Then another. Then 10 at once. The jungle nearest the excavation erupted as creatures burst from the tree line. Lean, shrieking predators driven out of the lower caverns by the tremors below. 12 shapes in all, long-limbed and rib-thin, with pale hides stretched tight over their frames and eyes clouded white from a lifetime in darkness. They were not hunting from hunger. They were fleeing something worse. The survey team panicked. 2 ran for the northern ridge. 3 clustered around the supply sled. 1 froze completely, staring at the widening cracks racing under his boots. Elias moved first. He sprinted across the broken ground, grabbed the frozen crewman by the harness, and yanked him backward just as the earth split open where he had been standing. The gap swallowed a crate of drilling charges and sealed in a shower of dirt. Elias shoved the man toward the others, then turned, knife in one hand, flare in the other. That choice changed everything. The flare hissed alive in violent red light, and the nearest predator snapped toward him instead of the crew. Elias ran hard across the slope, drawing 3 of the creatures away from the group and straight toward a jagged corridor of fractured stone. He could not kill them. He knew that. He only needed to make them commit. They did. The first leaped. Elias dropped flat. The creature sailed over him and crashed into a razor-edged outcrop. The second swiped his shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin. Hot blood soaked down his arm. He jammed the flare into its face and rolled as the third slammed into the ground beside him hard enough to crack rock. Back at the ring, Claire Whitmore stared at the glowing handprints and finally understood why Kong had reacted with recognition. The prints were his shape. Not human hands. Not claws. Titan hands. An entire circle of them, all pointing downward, as if giants long before Kong had forced something beneath the island and sealed it there together. The last of the island predators vanished into the trees so fast they looked less like hunters and more like prey. A moment earlier, the jungle had been alive with shrieks, wing beats, and the constant grinding rustle of things moving through leaves. Now all of it was gone. No insects. No distant roars. Even the air felt wrong, heavy and waiting, as if Skull Island had taken one enormous breath and refused to let it go. Elias Reed slowed first. Mud clung to his boots as he stepped past a torn nest half buried in ferns. The eggs inside had been abandoned, cracked open from the inside by hatchlings that had clearly fled before they were ready. 20 feet farther on, claw marks scored a fallen trunk so deep they shone pale against the bark. Whatever had made them had not climbed over. It had climbed up, scrambling toward higher ground. That stopped him cold. The survey team bunched together without meaning to. All 6 of them kept their rifles pointed outward, but nobody picked a target. There was nothing to aim at. That was the problem. Claire Whitmore came out from the stone ring carrying one of her sample lamps and a satchel already dusted white from scraped mineral flakes. She looked from the fleeing tracks to Elias Reed's face and saw he had reached the same conclusion before she said it. Everything is leaving the low ground. He did not answer right away. He crouched, pressed 2 fingers into a fresh print in the wet soil, then glanced upslope through the layered jungle canopy. Not leaving, he said quietly. Running upward. That changed the shape of the fear around them. Predators fleeing meant a larger predator. But this was bigger than that. The island's normal violence had structure. One species drove another. A kill here forced movement there. Elias Reed knew the patterns. This was not a pattern. This was evacuation. A dull tremor passed underfoot. Leaves shivered. Pebbles danced. Far off in the green distance, a tower of birds burst from the canopy and spiraled toward the clouds. Then the silence returned, even deeper than before. Kong appeared above them on a black ridge of stone, more felt than seen at first, a massive shadow framed by steam rising from cracks in the earth. He was not hunting. He was listening. His head tilted, shoulders rigid, one scarred hand pressed to the ground. Claire Whitmore watched him, then turned back to the ring of glowing handprints. The light had dimmed, but not disappeared. Thin veins of blue-white radiance still pulsed through the carved stone like a heartbeat traveling under skin. She moved to the outer edge and brushed away more dirt with gloved hands. More symbols emerged beneath the moss. Not language exactly. Repeating lines. Circles broken by downward spears. Layer after layer of the same warning cut by hands far too large to belong to anything human. One of the survey team asked what she was seeing, but Claire Whitmore barely heard him. The marks did not celebrate a prison. They documented pressure. She followed the carvings around the circle until she reached a section split by a fresh crack. There, hidden under packed clay, was the missing detail. Every Titan hand in the ring pointed down toward the same center. But beside them were 12 deep gouges slanting upward from below, as if something had once struck the underside of the stone again and again. Not trying to get in, trying to get out. Another tremor hit, stronger this time. A nearby slope shed dirt in a whispering slide. Somewhere underground, something vast scraped against rock. Claire Whitmore stood so fast, she nearly lost her balance. "It isn't a tomb," she said. "It's a seal. And it's failing." On the ridge, Kong's posture changed at once. He rose to full height and looked past the trees toward the island's central highlands, where jagged cliffs knifed out of the jungle like broken teeth. He gave one short, thunderous bark, not of rage but command. Elias Reed understood before anyone else. The warning came a fraction too late. Stone cracked beneath the expedition's boots with a sound like cannon fire, and the ridge split straight down the middle. Dirt, roots, and black volcanic rock sheared away into sudden emptiness. One of the survey team screamed as the earth dropped under him, and the whole jungle seemed to lurch sideways. Elias Reed moved before thought could catch up. He slammed into Claire Whitmore, driving her away from the opening just as the ledge where she had been standing collapsed into the dark. A burst of hot air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of wet minerals, rotting vegetation, and something older than either of them wanted to name. The ravine tore through the clearing in seconds, widening from a crack to a chasm nearly 40 feet across. Trees tilted and vanished. Supply cases slid into the gap and shattered on unseen rock. The survey team was ripped apart in the chaos, 3 stranded on the far side, 3 lost somewhere downslope in the haze of falling dust. Then the island shook again. Not a tremor this time. A shove. The ground bucked so hard that Elias dropped to one knee. Claire caught herself on a slab of exposed stone, fingers scraping across carved grooves that had been hidden under the soil moments earlier. Circular markings. Interlocking lines. The same ancient pattern they had just uncovered, now stretching into the torn earth like part of a machine too large for the island itself. Above them, Kong did the one thing Elias Reed had not expected. He left. Not in retreat. Not in fear. Kong turned from the broken expedition and launched himself down the ridge, smashing through trees, ignoring the humans completely as he charged toward the central highlands. Every territorial instinct he had shown until now vanished beneath one urgent purpose. Whatever had cried out from below had pulled him harder than the presence of intruders ever had. Claire stared after him through the dust. "If Kong is running toward it," she said, breathless, "then it's worse than we thought." Another crash answered her from the jungle behind. The displaced predators had arrived. The first of the island predators burst from the undergrowth in blind panic, all muscle, scales, and hooked forelimbs, driven uphill by the quakes. It barely noticed the humans before another came behind it, and another. A full wave of native killers was being flushed out of lower ground and forced into the same shrinking pocket of stable earth. This was no longer about uncovering anything. It was about staying alive. Elias seized what the ravine had spared: a coil of rope, a half-crushed field pack, 1 flare canister, and a machete. Most of their food, radios, and climbing gear were gone. Claire managed to recover a sample satchel and a compact flashlight from the rubble before a fresh rain of stones forced them back. Across the gap, the three stranded members of the survey team shouted for help, but the ravine widened again with a grinding roar. Any jump was impossible now. Any rescue would have meant dying with them. That was the price the island demanded first. Elias looked once, jaw tight, then dragged Claire downhill along the more stable edge as the nearest predator slammed into a tree behind them hard enough to split the trunk. "Move," he snapped. Claire resisted for half a second, twisting back toward the trapped crew. "We can't just leave them. We can if the ground does it for us." It was brutal, and she hated that he was right. They descended through a maze of shattered roots and broken stone, slipping on fresh mud where underground water had suddenly burst to the surface. Elias trusted motion, angles, survival. Claire trusted patterns. At the base of the slope, those instincts collided. He aimed for dense jungle cover where a predator their size might lose sight of them. She stopped at a wall of newly exposed rock. The cliff face had split clean open, revealing a narrow seam descending into darkness. The crack in the cliff looked less like a cave than a wound, as if Skull Island itself had been split by something pushing from below. Cold air spilled out of the seam in damp, uneven breaths. It carried a smell older than rot, older than seawater, a buried mineral stink mixed with something faintly organic. Claire Whitmore stepped closer, running a flashlight along the jagged opening. The stone had not broken outward. It had bowed inward first, then torn apart. Elias Reed glanced back toward the jungle where the displaced predators still crashed through ferns and hanging roots somewhere upslope. He wanted movement, distance, a defensible path. Claire Whitmore saw a pattern in the rock and made a choice faster than he expected. She slipped into the seam before he could stop her. Inside, the temperature dropped hard. The passage was barely shoulder-wide at first, forcing them sideways between wet stone walls slick with black runoff. Then it widened abruptly into a subterranean chamber so vast their lights vanished before reaching the ceiling. Massive pillars rose from the floor like fossilized tree trunks. Veins of blue-gray mineral ran through the walls in looping bands, not random, but deliberate. They curved inward toward a circular depression in the center of the chamber, where shattered stone rings lay half-buried under fresh debris. Claire Whitmore forgot the predators, forgot the rain above. She moved through the chamber with the stunned focus of someone stepping into a truth that had waited thousands of years to be seen. Symbols covered the inner walls. Not writing. Not exactly. They were gouge marks and impact grooves arranged in repeated sequences, some the size of truck tires, others thin and precise, layered across the stone in concentric arcs. At first Elias Reed saw only damage. Then Claire Whitmore angled her light, tracing old fractures beneath the newest collapse, and the chamber changed shape in his mind. "This wasn't a temple," she said quietly. "It was a lock." Near the far wall, a slab taller than a house had cracked down the middle. Behind it, preserved by dry mineral air, lay a field of bones fused into the floor. Some belonged to creatures unlike anything still alive on the island. Long, narrow skulls lined with recurved teeth, rib cages built deep and flexible, forelimbs ending in hooked climbing claws. There were dozens of them, but none complete. Many had been broken by immense blunt force trauma. Above them, embedded in stone, sat something even older, a gigantic handprint with proportions Elias Reed recognized instantly. Kong's species had been here. Claire Whitmore's breathing changed. Not fear. Understanding. She found a section of wall where the mineral bands formed a clean spiral around a central cavity. Within it sat brittle organic layers pressed flat over time, like membranes fossilized in mudstone. She cut a thin sample free with a field blade and held it under her light. The tissue was lined with tiny hollow chambers, each one branching toward the next. "A resonant organ," she said. "Not vocal cords. A lure structure." Elias Reed stared at her. "Say that in plain English." Claire Whitmore looked toward the broken rings in the center of the chamber. The sound wasn't a distress call. It was bait. Her voice dropped as the rest fell into place. Something down here evolved to mimic weakness. It drew a titan close. A defender. A rival. Then proximity triggered the collapse mechanism. She swept the beam across the chamber again, connecting every impossible detail at once. The inward bent stone, the radial damage, the concentric restraints, the dead species, the giant handprint. Long before Kong's time, Skull Island had nearly been destroyed by whatever had lived beneath it. Kong's ancestors had not come here to worship. They had come here to bury. Elias Reed felt the meaning of that more than he understood the science. And Kong heard it. Yes, Claire Whitmore said. Which means the prison is failing exactly the way it was designed to fail. A low vibration moved through the chamber. Not from above, from under their boots. Dust trickled from the ceiling. The vibration deepened until the stone beneath the chamber floor felt less like rock and more like the back of some buried animal trying to rise. Cracks raced through the carved platform in thin black lines, splitting old Titan markings in half. Then the whole ruin lurched. Elias Reed grabbed Claire Whitmore's arm before she was thrown into the broken edge of the altar. Behind them, the survey team staggered in panic, boots scraping over loose fragments as dust burst from the ceiling in thick gray curtains. Somewhere deeper in the dark, a roar rolled up through the mountain. It was not a hunting call. It was a warning. Another shock hit, stronger than the first. The rear wall of the chamber split open with a sound like wet thunder, revealing a narrow break in the stone where cold air blasted upward from below. Claire Whitmore looked once at the shattered carvings, then made the decision before anyone else could argue. That opens above the southern sink zone, she said, already moving. If the prison is collapsing, that's where it breaks through. This time Elias Reed did not stop her. He drove the survey team toward the fracture, forcing order into their fear, counting all 6 as they squeezed through the opening one by one. The passage beyond was steep, jagged, and barely wide enough for shoulders. It climbed through the mountain at a hard angle, and every few seconds the walls shivered around them, raining pebbles down their backs. More than once the island predators they had escaped below announced themselves with shrieks echoing through lower tunnels, but none came after them. Even the hunters of Skull Island were pulling away from whatever was waking under the ground. By the time they emerged, daylight had turned strange. The jungle canopy ahead was heaving in waves. Trees bent, straightened, and then dropped into emptiness as an enormous section of land caved inward. What had once been a valley was now a widening sink zone nearly half a mile across, its edges collapsing in great sections of mud, roots, and black stone. Steam poured from the abyss. So did that same impossible sound Elias had heard before, a cry too deep for any human throat, too old to belong to anything living on the surface. And at the edge of that opening stood Kong. He looked impossibly small against the scale of the disaster and impossibly powerful at the same time. His feet were planted wide in the tearing earth. One hand dug into a ridge of exposed stone while the other drove downward into the cracked lip of the sink zone, as if he were trying to hold the island itself shut. Every muscle across his shoulders and chest strained beneath mud, blood, and ash. Elias had seen rage in Kong before. This was something else. Claire Whitmore understood it first. He's bracing it, she said, her voice almost lost under the rumbling ground. He's not trying to attack whatever's below. He's trying to stop it from opening. Kong roared into the abyss, but the sound carried no triumph. It was defiance, a command, a challenge thrown downward at something still hidden. In response, the sink zone convulsed. A massive pulse rose from beneath, and the ground around Kong buckled. He dropped to one knee as the earth tried to drag him in. Elias Reed moved before fear could root him in place. He scanned the ridge and saw what Claire had seen too late. Towering slabs from the ruined outer ring of the temple, cracked loose by the tremors and hanging above the collapsing basin. If they fell the wrong way, they would smash directly into Kong's back or knock him into the opening. He shouted to the survey team and pointed them toward a line of half-buried stone levers jutting from the ridge, ancient mechanisms tied to the old containment ring. Claire Whitmore sprinted beside him, not toward Kong, but toward the machinery his ancestors had left behind. It was the first human choice that did not come from survival. It came from understanding. Stone groaned beneath their boots as the first lever moved. What had looked half-buried and dead for centuries answered Claire Whitmore's weight with a deep metallic shudder, and the ridge around her trembled like muscle under skin. Elias Reed threw his shoulder into the second lever while the survey team scrambled across the fractured slope. each person choosing a station as the ground split wider below them. Across the basin, Kong was still locked at the edge of the opening, every tendon in his back standing out as he fought to keep the widening fault from pulling him down into the firelit dark. Then the island answered with something worse than collapse. The ring of ancient stone surrounding the breach began to rise. At first it looked like broken pillars lifting through dust. A second later the shapes bent, curved, locked together. Bone-white arches, huge as ship hulls, forcing themselves up through black earth as if a skeleton the size of a mountain were pushing its way out of Skull Island's buried heart. Steam burst from the cracks. Heat rolled over the ridge in a blast so intense it turned the rain hissing into vapor. Claire shoved her lever down another inch. Symbols cut into the stone flashed with a molten orange glow, and one section of the ancient ring slammed inward. Not enough to close the breach, just enough to shear off a rising column of bone-like rock before it could spear into Kong's side. The thing below reacted. A sound hit the island that was not a roar, not an earthquake, but both at once. It traveled through the ground first, a violent pulse that threw 3 members of the survey team flat and sent loose boulders skipping into the chasm. The basin floor buckled. Entire plates of jungle rose and folded over each other. Trees tipped, roots dangling in the air, while displaced island predators burst from the brush in blind panic, fleeing the tremors only to race straight into a battlefield that had not existed a minute earlier. Elias saw the pattern before anyone else. The old containment ring was not sealing the buried force. It was trying to pin its limbs as it emerged. "Left side," he shouted, pointing to a third lever as a jagged white mass punched through the basin floor and unfolded like a giant hooked forelumb. It was covered in mineral crust and streaks of glowing magma beneath translucent stone. Claws, each longer than a fishing boat, carved trenches through the mud as the buried titan dragged itself higher. Kong moved before the next upheaval could swallow the ridge. He let go of the opening and lunged sideways, slamming both fists down on the exposed limb. The impact shook the valley. Stone armor cracked. A burst of superheated air exploded from the wound, blasting mud and shattered rock for 100 feet. For one instant, the thing's arm recoiled. Then the terrain turned against all of them. The ridge carrying the levers split in two. Claire dropped to her knees as the stone beneath the fourth mechanism tilted toward the chasm. One member of the survey team slid screaming toward the break. Elias did not chase him. He drove a dropped steel piton through a seam in the rock, hooked a rope through it, and kicked the line across the gap. Claire caught it with both hands, wrapped it around the lever base, and turned her own body into an anchor. The crew member slammed into the line hard enough to tear the skin from his palms, but he stopped inches from the drop. That choice cost them time. A second limb erupted from the far side of the basin, then a spine of massive ridges climbed out of the earth behind it. The rising enemy was not simply buried under the island. Parts of the island had formed around it. Bone-like cliffs, chalk ridges, and ancient white formations across the valley suddenly made terrible sense. Skull Island had been growing over a prison no one alive had understood. The valley answered with movement too large for the mind to accept. What had looked solid a moment earlier now rolled in slow, monstrous waves, as if the whole island had started breathing through stone. Ridges split down the middle. White cliffs sheared away in slabs the size of office buildings. The basin floor lifted under Kong's feet, bucked, and then dropped 10 feet in a spray of shattered rock. Dust blasted outward so hard it nearly threw the survey team off the ledge. Below them, the thing rising from the prison forced the land to change shape around it. One massive limb shoved free, then another. Between them, a back armored in pale, ridge-like spines dragged itself through the earth, carrying half the valley with it. The old bone-white formations had never been natural. They were pressure scars. The island had spent ages trying to hold this titan down. Claire Whitmore saw the pattern before anyone else did. Through the collapsing haze, black stone pylons around the rupture flashed in sequence, each one buried deep in the basin wall until the heaving ground exposed them. Ancient carved channels ran from those pylons toward the open wound in the valley floor. Not a tomb, she realized. A lock. Those pillars are still connected. Claire shouted, bracing herself as the ledge cracked beneath her boots. If the channel closes, it forces the plate back down. Elias Reed looked from the awakening titan to the exposed line of stone. The path to it was insane. A narrow shelf, already breaking apart, ran along the basin wall toward the nearest pylon. 50 yards of falling rock, predator screams echoing from behind, and one wrong step meant death. Kong did not get that choice. The buried titan lunged upward with terrifying speed, its long forelimbs scything through the dust. It was shaped like something caught between reptile and burrowing nightmare, with a skull flattened for tunneling, eyeless pale flesh under plates of limestone armor, and a mouth that opened vertically into rows of grinding black teeth. When it screamed, the valley walls answered. The sound was the cry that had been traveling under Skull Island all this time, not a call for help, but the pain and rage of something waking inside its chains. Kong met it at the rupture point. He drove both fists into its head and forced it back into the shattered basin. For 1 second, the earth stopped moving. Then the titan twisted, coiling its body beneath the surface. Entire sections of ground rippled away from Kong like a rug being snapped from under him. He dropped to one knee as a ridge collapsed against his shoulder. The pale monster struck again, and this time its teeth clamped into his forearm. Kong roared and slammed the creature sideways into a rising wall of stone, but he could not pull it fully free. The island itself was helping it move. Claire ran first. That changed everything. She sprinted onto the breaking shelf toward the nearest pylon, not to escape, but to reach the lock. Elias cursed, grabbed the coil of climbing line from his pack, and followed. Behind them, the 6-person survey team scattered across the higher rocks, trying to avoid a rain of debris while the 12 displaced island predators shrieked from the collapsing jungle line, driven mad by tremors and smoke. The shelf broke twice under Claire. On the second snap, Elias dropped flat, slammed a piton into a crack, and caught her with the line before she vanished into the basin. The jolt nearly tore his shoulder out of socket. Claire swung against the cliff face, hit hard, then dragged herself back onto the stone with blood running from one temple. No pause. No retreat. At the pylon, she saw the truth etched into its face. Giant impact fractures from inside, not outside. This prison had not been built to keep invaders out. It had been built to keep one prisoner from pushing up. Kong has to force it into the center. Claire yelled. Elias looked down. Kong was losing ground. Kong was losing ground, but for the first time, he stopped fighting the thing below like it was only a beast. He looked at the shattered pylons. He looked at the spiraling trench collapsing toward the center of the island basin. And then something in him changed. Not rage. Understanding. The cry rising from beneath Skull Island came again. Deeper now, so powerful it shook dust from the cliffs and sent cracks racing through the black stone under Elias Reed's boots. It was not a call for conquest. It was the sound of something ancient forcing its way back into a world that no longer wanted it. Kong. Claire Whitmore screamed, one hand pressed against the blood at her temple as she pointed to the center of the ring. Not out. Down. Kong turned. Below him, the prison floor had split into a wide, glowing wound, and from inside it, the buried titan kept driving upward. Its armored crown, all jagged basalt ridges and molten seams, shoved through the broken earth again. One more surge, and the entire basin would rupture. Skull Island would not survive another breach. Elias saw Kong make a choice no animal would make. Instead of trying to overpower the titan at the edge, Kong lunged past it. He took the hit full in the ribs as the monster surged upward, a blow that would have shattered steel. Kong staggered, nearly fell to one knee, then slammed both hands into the broken pylon base. Muscles knotted across his shoulders. Ancient Stone groaned. He ripped the half-fallen column free and drove it sideways like a spear into the trench wall. The whole basin shifted. Claire understood first. He's collapsing the chamber, she shouted. The prison had never been a fortress. It had been a trigger. Force the prisoner into the center, break the supports in the right order, and the island itself would finish the job. The buried titan realized it too late. It exploded upward in a storm of rock and fire, finally revealing its full head and shoulders. Massive, blunt, and horrible, with a face like cooled lava split by orange light. Not a dragon. Not a serpent. A living siege hammer from a forgotten age, built to rise beneath kingdoms and break them from below. Kong met it head-on. But this was not a fight for victory anymore. It was a fight for position. He let the creature drive him backward, step by step, exactly where he wanted to go. Elias felt the pattern and moved before he could think. Claire, the last charges. They had been meant to clear an escape path. Now there would be no escape path. Claire stared at him for half a second, then nodded. No argument. No hesitation. Together they ran along the cracked ledge toward the final pylon route. Behind them, the 6 members of the survey team, battered and terrified but still alive, pulled one another toward higher stone as the 12 displaced island predators scattered from the shuddering basin below. Kong roared and locked both arms around the emerging titan's neck and shoulder ridge. The creature hammered at his back, tearing flesh, driving him to the lip of the center shaft. Kong dug in, heels carving trenches through the rock. Now, Elias shouted. Claire triggered the charges. The final pylon root blew apart with a flash of white fire and pulverized stone. For one endless second, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath the titan vanished. The center of Skull Island opened like a giant throat. Ancient support walls folded inward. Entire shelves of black rock sheared away. The buried titan gave one last roar, not of fury but of shock, as the prison completed the purpose it had been waiting ages to fulfill. Kong used the collapsing pull, twisted with it, and drove the monster down into the heart of the sinking chamber. The island sealed behind them in thunder. Elias thought Kong was gone. Claire did too. He saw it in her face as the basin kept sinking and dust swallowed everything. The sound that followed was worse than the roar of battle. Silence.